My husband George was not particularly thrilled with having a son. He wanted another little daughter, another Judy. A boy was a big surprise. This baby was different from the day of his birth. He couldn't take the slightest wind. He spent his waking hours watching us as if he was completely detached. As he learned to walk, he walked right off the edge of a bench and hit his head on the asphalt. He stood up tearless and reassured me. "It's all right, Mommy, it didn't hurt." In junior high, I visited during the open school evening. One teacher told me everyone hated Jeff, and moreover, if not for her, he would forget to eat his lunch. I told her to just let him go hungry. His English teacher described him as the only one who understood his course. However, his music teacher was going to fail him because he wouldn't open his notebook. I told her he surely already knew what she was teaching and to give him special projects. But he received a very low grade because I could not convince him to open his notebook. At 17, he was accepted in the Manhattan School of Music for composition and Cooper Union for art.
Music has a performance aspect to it, as does drama, or it's a stage thing. You can compose, but someone's going to play it. And performance, you can prepare the performance, but you can't take it back. See, it's a happening. Painting is something where you can make adjustments, and you don't have to show it until you completely feel good about it, that you've made all of these adjustments, corrections, and things. So it's looking like something that you feel not embarrassed about showing other people. So that's a big difference right then. And both of these things kind of interest me. I mean, I'm interested by the risk factor in performing, but I'm also like the idea of getting things right. And then somehow in performance, it never really completely is what you intended to do. It's always an approximation, you know. So it's different parts of my personality that they suit, and I've never really abandoned music completely. And I still, you know, play the piano. And I sometimes used to, at least I used to give concerts.
What do you find that how are they similar to you?
Well, so one of the things that happened in my lifetime, really, is that the performance aspect did get into painting, which it never, I mean, never existed before, the performance aspect of painting. And in a funny way, I think it started with Jackson Pollock, because one of the things that made him famous was a film of him painting. And Jackson Pollock worked on the floor. And he worked with a stick, and he'd stick it into wet paint, and he'd move around the painting in a circle, kind of like almost a ceremonial dance. There was a dance aspect to it. And people were fascinated by it. Maybe even more fascinated than they were by the actual paintings. There was also a whole sequence of still photographs of him moving around the painting on the floor. And the thing about the kind of painting that came out of that way of painting, which was that it was basically additive. In other words, you were putting paint, but you can't take the paint away. The only thing you can do is add another layer or another, but you can't really make a correction to a Jackson Pollock. You can either stop or you can continue. And you can't really see it until you hang it. In fact, you're not even entirely sure what's the top and what's the bottom because you're working around. Now, a lot of people were really excited by that. And a whole school of painting came out of that. And that was the school of painting that was really prevalent when I was studying. So I started working on the floor too. And I started working with acrylic. Acrylic paint became very popular. And the same thing is true about acrylic paint. It hardens almost, maybe not instantly, but in a few minutes. So you're stuck with whatever is occurring. The only thing you can do is add more or throw it out. You can't make adjustments. There's no subtractive element to it. And I tried that actually for almost 2 years, and then I gave it up because I wanted to be able to remove, to make adjustments. I think just because you're an abstract painter, that doesn't mean that you can't make adjustments. Once you're making adjustments, it's no longer performance, right? Nobody wants to see someone go up on the stage and say, wait, I didn't mean that, I'm going to try this, right? It has to be fluid. It has to go. It has to go, A performance has to go. I don't care if you're an actor or if you're a musician. It has to go. And when you look at creative work like musical composition or poetry or playwriting or painting, it's always adjustments. There's no writer who just writes. You cross words out, you move them around, you move paragraphs around. With poetry, the first stanza maybe should be the third stanza. You have to feel like you have that flexibility when you're doing some musical composition too. So there's crossing out all the time and moving things around and getting that right, So that's not performance, you see. And I wanted that flexibility. You can't get that working on the floor. The only thing you can do is more of it. I had a professor, Jack Tworkov, who was the head of the program at Yale, the graduate program, for at least a decade. He took over from Joseph Albers when Albers retired. And he came down to Cooper Union because he was sort of retired himself, and he wanted to do a little bit of teaching, but not too much, where he could walk to school from his studio. And he told me I had to make a choice. Either I was going to be a modern artist and paint contemporary type of work, or I was going to be an old-fashioned artist and paint the way people did in the 19th century, you know. So
And was it something you saw that veered you towards abstract art, or?
I tried, but I kept up at both. The thing that was attractive about good old-fashioned painting and drawing was that I was good at it. I could draw quite well, so I had a skill set that I could develop. But the problem with a skill set is that you just can get better at it. And then at a certain point, you really can't get any better at it, and then you end up doing the same thing for the rest of your life, and it gets to be a bit of a drag. But abstraction was much more mysterious.
Was there an influence or an artist that
A
influenced
big show.
you?
It was a big show that I went to. It was the biggest show of abstract art that had existed up until that point at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1970. It was called New York School Painting and Sculpture, and it was organized by Henry Getzalder, who was a famous curator of the day. And it was huge. It was 400 and some odd paintings. And everybody, all the major artists got their own room. So there was a Clifford Still room and a Jackson Pollock room and a Hoffman room and a de Kooning room and a Klein room. And in each room, these were huge rooms, and each room had at least 8 paintings, maybe more. So you really got to see a lot of what was happening. And although I didn't quite understand what I was looking at, it was very exciting. You know, you can be excited by things that you also don't really understand. As a matter of fact, you can be more excited by things that you don't understand. Artists are very uncomfortable talking about that. Usually what we do is we point to something like a quartet by, Beethoven, and you say, well, what does that mean? Basically it's playing around with forms. In the case of music, it might be playing around with pitches and rhythms and dynamics in order to create emotion. But it doesn't mean anything directly outside of itself. It's just that humanity is susceptible to that, and they get emotions out of listening to that. You hear a certain kind of music, you want to get up and dance. You hear another kind of music and you want to dream. It's very serene. So music, has those qualities, but that doesn't actually mean in any kind of semantic sense anything really outside of itself. That's one answer. That was Kandinsky's answer, that abstract painting was a form of visual music. That was his way of dealing with these kinds of questions. I think, and I said this a little earlier, that when you're playing with forms, they can be circles, they can be anything. They can be potato shapes. They can be leaf shapes. They can be anything, something completely unrecognizable. It doesn't really matter, okay? There's still this question about, can you create a unity between different elements in your painting? You see, so form, when people talk about formalism, what they have to understand about formalism is that it's an agreement between two oppositions, variety and unity, and you need both in art. You can have variety without unity, that doesn't get you any place. If you have unity without variety, that doesn't get you any place. If you can create an amalgamation of these two opposites into a synthesis, then you're an artist. That's what art is all about, really. Now, what is the meaning of that? Well, I think it's a kind of a metaphor for life itself and for human existence. We want both these things in our lives. We want security. We want a certain degree of predictability, but we also want adventure. Continuity creates reality, really. And if you believe something is true, no one can tell you different. When you wake up in the morning, you reconnect with when you went to bed. You recognize your bed, you recognize the cupboard, you recognize your shoes, the window, and it becomes you become part of the same person who went to sleep, 10 hours earlier. Those days that connect to the previous day is what creates your reality. Your dreams, which are also full of narrative and stories, are disconnected. When they're not disconnected, when you have recurrent dreams, then they start to appear real to you also. And you may have to go to a doctor. You have to go to a psychiatrist if you have recurrent dreams, because they start to become a reality for you. So what is creating that reality is continuity. So I think that's a very good definition of reality, actually. And a painting has to have reality. Now, if you're looking at an abstract painting, you can say, what are you talking about? This is not real. But it has a consistency. A painting doesn't really exist in time because this image is static. It's not going anyplace. And, if you look at a Van Gogh, if you look at the swirls of his cypress trees, you can see the beginning of the swirl and the end of the swirl simultaneously. It's not unfurling in time. It's unfurling on the canvas in front of you, but you see the beginning and the end. It's a static image. A painting can only be a static image. That's why it's not really good. It doesn't serve narrative well. So then what kind of consistency and continuity are we talking about? We're talking about the way you approach it throughout the entire picture has to be consistent with itself. You can't paint differently in one part and differently in another. It has to be one totalistic vision. Okay, I want to get some activity going there in the lower left. Move away. I think I've got enough yellow going on here. Let's see where we go with. Okay. As soon as you get the paint out to the edge, you can start to see a tiny little bit of what you've got. Okay. All right, so that's not bad. So that up there, that's kind of an open circle kind of that is occurring there. That I might be able to use that. Let me see, I'll put one in here.
Now, do you think your previous painting that you did, whatever at work, right, goes to influence your next one?
Usually I react against it. All right, so here's an idea. I don't know whether it's that good, but I'm going to work with this thing and maybe this one and these two blue dots in the middle with an open section. All right, so I'll probably go on like that for a while. I'm going to stop soon, and we'll just go on.
Now, would you consider this what you might call play?
Yeah. Well, this is more like playing around than play. All right. So the only, as I say, play in the terms of like a game has organization to it. There's no organization here other than the rectangle itself and trying to get different elements working. But right now I have this idea going here in the middle, and I'm going to probably work with that for a while. That's as close as I've gotten to something where I feel. See, I like that yellow line that I just made. See, but when I made it, I didn't know whether, but now I'm looking at it and I'm saying, well, that doesn't look, this whole section here is looking pretty interesting. I might be able to go there. I don't know. I'm going to see, now I'm kind of getting interested in what I'm doing. But, I think.
I think it's a great work so far.
Well, I don't know. But
I think you like an audience.
Actually, it makes me very nervous.
Well, maybe that's a good thing.
No, it's not.
It's coming out good. I like it.
Normally I'd sit down more and take a look at it. Now it's a little bit everything is a bit rushed and.
Well, like you said, you have time.
I have infinite amount of time. well, I wanted to talk about that. This idea that as an artist, it's not a job, so you don't have a deadline. There's no time when this painting has to be finished. It could be finished a year from now. In theory, it could go on forever.
Well, you're giving us a glimpse of how you work. It doesn't mean
Right.
that, it's not.
Right. Well, I used this metaphor before. I'll use it now again. It's spreading the board. It's like a brake shop. You're creating a lot of possibilities. I got yellows in here, reds, blues. I had some green, but the green I didn't think was working at all. I got a little opening here in the middle. And that's almost like a little eye there, a little space there right in the middle. And I have these two kind of weird semicircles. They're not really. So that painting that I started a few weeks ago, this is finished, I think. It's been sitting like this for a couple of days. And I think you can see that I've consolidated things pretty much. This part over here is still there from when I started. And so is this little eye there that I talked about. And very loosely, I think I had a kind of two semicircles here, and I still have something like that, but of course it's completely different. So part of the way I started is still a kind of, the odor is still around, but of course the whole painting has completely changed, and I've consolidated it, and less dependent on splashy paint, which I use to just kind of get around the canvas. And it went through a lot of changes, and things disappeared and then appeared differently. The last thing I did was up here, So what you're looking for is a certain level of surprise and interest, but also continuity. And you have a kind of a passage like that, and then these two, and then answered here. This is like an open, empty area, and here's a very dense area, but it's basically these colors, but darker. As I say, you're playing around with these ideas and thoughts and trying to create a complete composition with them that exists within the total rectangle and that implicates the rectangle. That's how you get close to it. That's the whole purpose from moving out like that. So you want your energy really to go this way. You don't want the energy coming in. All right. So if you think of every object as really a contraction, and you're trying to expand, even though you're using shapes. So what you're doing is inherently kind of irrational in that way, because a shape is really always a contraction. By contraction I mean the eye focuses in on objects. I mean, we do. If you're going to reach for something, if there's a cup of coffee on the table, you see the cup of coffee. That's what you're going to reach for. You're not going to look next to the cup of coffee. You're going to look at the cup, because that's how we interact with the world. So we're always contracting our vision towards interacting with it. See, but you're not going to interact with a painting physically. It's just meant to be looked at. It has no reason for existing other than to be seen. So there's no reason to create the sensations of contraction. You can go the other way. You can open up vision so that, and then there's just a question of how far do you want to open it. And I think the best way to open it is to the perimeter. You don't want things to look like they're a fragment of something that just keeps on going. I mean, there are some artists, including abstract artists, who like to do that. They like to make something that where the shapes go flying and half of them are off the canvas completely and they're not even, the painting looks like a section of something that just keeps going. I try to avoid that, and I think one way of avoiding it, of course, is to show where the edges are. See, this shows the left edge, that shows the top, shows the right, that shows the bottom. So you get the tension that is required for painting. The painting has to have an inner tension that holds it together, kind of like the surface tension of a bubble on a windshield. What keeps it from just dribbling it down? Why does it stay there in that little ball? It has that surface tension that holds it, and you want something like that in your painting, that surface tension. And so you try to get the vision to expand so that you catch that. This is really important. If you can think of a balloon, the larger the balloon gets, the more air you blow into it, the tenser the surface gets. And as much more tension, the larger it is, When there's no air in it, it's flaccid, right? So you try to get it as big as you can before you tie it off. So visually speaking, you want that in your work. It can't just be things drifting around. It has to have a sense of tension that creates the feeling of what a picture is. And when I started talking, and I was talking about tennis, and I was talking about games, that's what creates the tension that creates a game, is the borders. If you're hitting a baseball and there's no foul lines at all, then wherever the hell the ball goes doesn't really matter. There's no tension to that. You're just hitting a ball. Once you have the foul lines, it becomes a game. But then you have rules, the rules that apply to that game. And that those real rules, now they can be cultural rules that you were given. In this case, a rectangle is received culture. You didn't invent the rectangle. It came with Western culture. Or it can be rules that you yourself believe in, but you know that they're not absolute and don't extend for all eternity. I mean, painting didn't always look like this. Painting has evolved. So different rules start to substitute over time. But it was never like anything goes. It wasn't like a completely anarchical activity where, you can just float around and whatever occurs. There's no tension to that. That's a completely, and without tension, you can't have art. I think it's easy to see that I've been playing around. When you start, you are playing around. But what you are doing is you're distributing the paint through the picture. You're trying to get it out to the edges of the painting, out to the perimeter, and you're trying to have the line and the color not line up with each other. All right. They form a kind of a duet with each other, but it's a duet in which each are kind of have their own independence. Now, it is a form of play, and play needs some organization. Any form of game has characteristics. It's limited, it has a perimeter, it's limited in time and in space, one or the other or both. Whether it's a board game or whether it's an athletic game on a field, all those elements come into play. Also, and this is most important, because it has to do with art, is when you enter into a game or a field of play, is you surrender control of the results. If you knew how it would end, then you wouldn't play the game. What's the point of playing something if you know that it's going to end a certain way? Even if you're playing against an opponent, you don't know who's going to win, and that's why you would play. If you knew you were going to win, you wouldn't play the game. It's a special reality that is limited in time and space and has its own set of rules which don't apply to everyday life. That's true of art, and it's true of any game really that I can think of. Now, all of that, play and art, games of any kind, they all have their root in prehistory. They all have their root in a world in which magic was a very important part of life. And this idea of working intuitively, or there's a fair degree of clairvoyancy in it, where you get an intuition of how to proceed. It's extremely hard to do that in front of a camera. In front of a camera, it becomes inauthentic somehow. You're rushing and you're trying to, you have anxiety about trying to get somewhere before you really need to. But that is part of the whole discipline. You train yourself to see patterns and to see how things can develop from a certain part of your picture. You're always looking for an opening so that you can really paint on this picture. And sooner or later you get it. Sooner or later you get that opening. You may lose that thread later on, but then you have to pick up another thread. You're always trying to pick up a thread. Like in the labyrinth, you're trying to find your way back. Now, she said once she was after magic. That's what she wanted in her art. She was after, not art, she was after magic, which kind of was an interesting way of formulating it, because she was actually an astrologer. She was interested in certain occult practices, which she kind of took seriously, but they were also a social lubricant. So if she got to know you a little bit, she'd do your chart, which would take her like a week. And she had these huge books and all that. And she was the one who kind of explained to me the concept of the throw, which I've talked about a little bit, that when you do a reading, any kind of reading, whether it's astrology or tarot or reading sheep's guts or I Ching or anything, there's an arbitrary way of starting. You start in an arbitrary way, and that's the throw. And but the thing that I think made it work for me is that she understood that art was metaphor, that it was as if, whereas magic was literal. magic is not as if. Magic is, like I think I once said, the statue of the saint is the saint. And that's a sacred culture, understands that. There's a little town in France called Bourbon-l'Archambault. It's right in the center of France. It's where the Bourbon dynasty came from. And they had a statue there of one of the dukes, and it was called Guerlechon, which kind of means boy's penis. And the peasants, actually it wasn't just in that town, I heard it was actually in several places in France. The peasant ladies, women, would file off the genitals of the statue and put it in their wine to get pregnant. And when they finished with the private area, they would go to the chin. They'd start shaving, stone off the chin for the same reason, the toes and everything. And finally, the community took the statue and put it in a local museum to get it away from the peasants. So you see that it was actually the actual physical stuff. It was actually the substance of the statue that was important. That's a magical culture. They weren't thinking about it as art, as an aesthetic creation. They were thinking of it really as, I guess, as a kind of a fetish, really. They did a study once of some man who was burning in Africa, who was cutting off his fingernails and toenails when they got too long, and then he would burn them. And so the ethnologist studying this said, this is an example. They asked him why. Why are you burning your fingernails and toenails? He says, because if my enemies get a hold of it, they can kill me.
Well, that's true.
But here's the thing. If burning the fingers, nails, and toenails would kill him, then when he did it, it would also kill him. You see, but what he was saying really is, if my enemies get a hold of it with the proper ceremony and the right words, the right incantations and the odors and whatever, the whole ceremony, within that thing, they can kill me. Just burning them without that. And that's the same idea with the wafer and the wine. Outside of the Mass, if you just have a wafer and a wine outside on the lawn, it's a wafer and a wine. It's only within the context of the Mass that it becomes magic. You need to have the right words. You need to prepare the audience. You have to get the adrenaline going. You have to get that whole feeling of, even the architecture of the church, especially at Gothic churches, were meant to create that whole state of mind in which magic can occur. Okay, so that, the thing about art is metaphor. It's not literal. It's an as if. It doesn't require ceremony. I don't come in here, have to put on a robe, have to say magic words, have to have incense going or anything in order to paint. I don't even clean my brushes. I just come in here and I work. You see, all that part has been removed. And the images that I create don't predict the future. They don't read the future. They're not concerned with the fate of man. They're supposed to be appreciated for their own sake, like a self-contained entity. It doesn't have anything to do with whether someone is going to get married or someone's about to die or giving somebody the evil eye or anything like that. But if you go back in time, if you go back to the beginnings of humanity, it comes out of that. Sculpture was either a fertility symbol, or it was a gargoyle, or it was an effigy, or a totem. It had magical properties, either repellent ones, or either connected with what you wanted to have happen or what you wanted to make sure it didn't happen. All that idea about controlling the future. So that is kind of the beginning of art. Kind of comes out of that. But it removes the witchery. It removes this witch aspect of it, and it starts to be appreciated as an aesthetic entity in which the elements have their own reason for existing without predicting something or trying to affect something in the future. And that's really, art kind of comes out of that. And so when Pat said she wanted magic, I don't think she wanted literal magic in the sense that I've been talking about, but that she wanted to have that very strong metaphorical feeling which connected with the occult, with the spirit world. I think that was part of Milton's thinking too, because this whole idea of fetishizing paint, that you don't change paint into something else. It stays paint, but it passes through you and becomes a kind of a spiritual substance. As it passes through you, that is a very mystical idea. That is an occult idea. It is not part of art history, really. Resnick thought of himself to some extent as the snake in the garden, giving you the poisoned apple. You were going to be recruited into this kind of rebel group that was separate from society. You were the opposite of a pop personality, really. You were going to develop yourself through painting. So you weren't so much developing your painting as your painting was developing you as an artist. In other words, you had to develop yourself so that you were truly receptive to what you were doing at every moment that you were doing it, so that every brushstroke would reflexively act on your psyche and would give you a clue to the next brushstroke. So it was almost like each step gave you the idea for the next step. And when you were in that zone, then you were really an artist. So really being an artist was when you were in that special psychic place where everything that you did led to the next thing. And so you were on track. You could,
a state of flow.
The state of flow. Athletes feel this. Sometimes you'll see a basketball player interviewed, and he scored like 65 points. And, they say, well, you were really in the zone. He says, I couldn't miss. There's no explanation for that. It's just that you get into a psychic place where all of a sudden it's doable. And
so you said you were always an artist even when you were young, right? So even though you were always an artist when you were young, there's a point where you veered in this direction. So it seems right. You could have been some other kind of painter. What I'm saying is, it seems like Resnick was an important conduit.
He was, because he had a kind of an idea of a universal kind of art, not a personal art, not an art that, your personality would get into it because there's no way to keep it out completely, but that you were trying to create something that really had some sort of universal value, that completely unconnected to whether you were a white person or a woman or a man or a young person or an old person, but something that,
And those values resonated with you.
Well, it's an attractive idea, I think, to try and make something that would have some sort of connection with people even yet to be born. It is the art idea, posterity. When I was in Britain, I went to the Victoria and Albert Museum. This is 40 years ago, which is just a big collection of everything that Britain had kind of stolen from everybody else. So it's art, and there's rugs, and there's all kinds of knickknacks and all kinds of things that Britain accumulated. And I was there with my wife, and about 20 feet away, I saw a little wax sculpture, a little modeled piece, about 8 inches high, 9 inches high. And I said, that looks like a Michelangelo. And I went over there, and I looked at it, and it said that it was a wax that Michelangelo had made and it was like the only one outside of the house, of the Casa de Buonarroti, where there's several of these little things. Now, it looked like something Michelangelo did while he was having lunch. It was just moving his thumbs into some wax and getting a little guy, but it had his feeling. It wasn't just the muscles, but it was also the torque of the figure, and it was kind of huge, but it was very small. And I started thinking, here's a guy who was on the Italian peninsula before Italy even existed as an entity, right? And I'm a guy in New York. I'm a kid from Queens. And I'm seeing it in Britain 500 years after it was made. And in a second or two, I can look across and say, oh, that looks like a Michelangelo. That is an incredible power, incredible feat that someone casually moving his thumbs through some wax can exude his Michelangelo-esque quality onto something, so that America was just being discovered by Columbus. We're talking, it's still full of Indians, and now somebody 500 years later, in Britain no less, can see it and say, that's a Michelangelo. That's an astounding thing. And what it means is that Michelangelo has developed himself as an artist to such a degree that the most casual little manipulation of wax has his mark through the ages, through 500 years, to somebody who brought up in a country that didn't even exist.
True, but it was you who were receptive to this. There's very few people who would be able to receive that and
All you
communicate
need
with them.
No, you're missing the point. You only need one person.
Yeah, you.
It doesn't matter whether it's me. It's not me. It could have been anybody who's in tune can get that. And if that transfer can be made across the ages and across the continents, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic feat. It's a fantastic human feat. It's greater than any atom bomb. It's much more profound than the largest building or anything that someone can just move his hands through some wax, and 500 years later someone goes, anybody, it doesn't have to be me, anybody says, now that's a Michelangelo. I think that's a Michelangelo.
I think you had the skills and the experience and the perception to understand this visual language of Michelangelo. I don't think anyone could have just walked in and said, oh, that's a Michelangelo. I think you had a...
I understand what you're saying, but what I'm trying to tell you is it's not about that it was me doing it. As long as any one person on this planet recognized it as a Michelangelo, it's an incredible feat by Michelangelo. If I made a painting and someone 500 years from now living on Mars, because that's what the United States was to Michelangelo, Mars. It was like another undiscovered world. Can look at my painting and say, oh, that's a Dorfman boy. I like, that's an incredible feat on my part. It doesn't have to be that thousands of people know it's a Michelangelo. Most people are so indoctrinated about the value of it and how expensive it would be if it was ever auctioned and all that stuff, and it becomes, just something measurable and quantifiable. I'm just talking about something that is completely unrelated to the value that, except that in one respect, that even the fact that it was available for me to look at meant that other people, see, that's the other thing that I'm not talking about. Why is it still there? So much that's 500 years old has been destroyed, including huge buildings and and this is being preserved, this little piece of wax. So thousands of people over 500 years went to the trouble of making sure this little wax piece was not destroyed. So it is you are in a sense connected by the simple fact that of the longevity of the thing, that the thing, cultures, British cultures, Italian cultures, all kinds of European cultures have gone to enormous effort to make sure that thing did not was not destroyed. So yeah, you're in that sense connected.
Isn't that in other words, is saying that it's the preservation of Western, let's say Western civilization, and isn't it also saying that it's a communication between the artist and the viewer?
It's a correspondence. It's not a two-way. It's a three-way. It's not a communication. There's the artist, there's the viewer, and then there's the artwork. The artwork is not the artist. The artwork, in fact, this is very Resnick-y. People think the art is the artist. No, the art is what is telling the artist, what is speaking to the artist. And if it's also speaking to you, it becomes a triangle. See, so you and the artist are corresponding to a third thing, which is what he did or she did, if it's a female, if it's a woman. And so it's not communication. Communication is like what you and me are having now. We're just going back and forth.
But we both understand English.
We understand English, well, because you have to know the language. Yes, of course. And you don't talk, communication means you need a calculation of who you're talking to. I'm talking English to you because I know that you know English. I'm not going to start talking to you in a language that you don't know. And I'm not going to talk to a small child about, physics or anything, because that means I'm not interested in communicating with him. I'm going to talk with a child, trying to make the child understand what I'm saying. So you always have a calculation with communication of who your audience is. And if you're really good at it, you become a politician. I mean, they're the best at it. They know exactly who their audience is. What I'm saying is art is not communication in that sense. You don't have a calculation of your audience. You're trying to make something that connects with you, and then the third person is an act of faith, that they will see in what you've done, some portion of what you see in it.
Well, most of those creations by Michelangelo were just simply created for money and for the church. They were just created as almost commercial items.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but
they were appreciated by a party who paid for them.
Michelangelo lived in a small world. Everybody's Catholic. Everybody knows the same stories. You do an Assumption of the Virgin. You don't have to explain it to anybody. You don't have to tell anybody what the Assumption of the Virgin is, because they all know that. Even the illiterate people know that. If they see the angel in front of Mary and Mary is going like this, they know it's an annunciation. They know what a deposition is, taking down the body of Jesus.
In that culture.
In that culture. But culture was like that then. You see, so art had that role, but we don't live in that world. We don't have a coherent, cohesive culture where everybody knows the same stories. Everybody has different stories. And now it's kind of ripping the whole world apart. That everybody has their own stories, narratives, cultures, things that they believe. Look at this huge fight we're having today over critical race theory, right? I mean, that's the narrative of what is the narrative of the United States going to be? Is it going to be one that's heroic and one in which we're exceptional and we've done something no one else has done? Or is it going to be that we're, a bunch of people who came over here so we could own slaves, because you couldn't own slaves in Great Britain anymore. It was illegal. So
or
you
it could
came
be
over
both.
here. Or both, which is actually the correct, I think, the way it's supposed to be. That you have to,
synthesize. Yeah.
Well, it's a synthesis of opposites. People who are idealistic, like Jefferson, but who also want the benefit of screwing the maid. The Romantic idea, which influenced art and literature really, was that you were going to liberate yourself through your imagination. And imagination would be the savior of mankind. And as poetry developed in the 19th century, especially in France, that began to include all aspects of thought, including taboos, sexual ones, murderous ones. So when you read, let's say, Lautréamont, Maldoror, you're reading about really despicable, sadistic acts. And of course, that goes all the way back to the Marquis de Sade. But this becomes an aspect of symbolist poetry. Now, surrealism grows out of that. And the quintessential surrealist act was supposed to be shooting into a crowd with a revolver, a crowd of strangers. That was the ultimate taboo, to do something that was completely irrational and completely inhuman. But no surrealist ever actually did anything like that. It was a kind of a literary conceit, really. We were taught that in college. I had to read Maldoror when I was 19 years old. I don't think you could give it out to a student now. But there was a whole bunch of writers, Huysmans, Villiers-la-Dame, Mallarmé, a whole bunch of French poets who were also involved with taboo thoughts. Not so much Mallarmé, but some of the others. Baudelaire, Rimbaud. It was literature. What happened in our culture is that it became massified and it became literal. So instead of just thinking about these taboo thoughts, we started seeing these things occur in high school. Some kid or two kids would come into a class and shoot up their classmates, kill the teacher, and this started to happen regularly, and it's of course happening today. We saw a man hole up in a hotel room and kill 80 people at a concert across the street with a machine gun. So it's almost like the surrealist conceit, which was meant to be metaphorical, became once more literal. So it's decadent. I mean, that's real decadence. When a bunch of people, French poets, drinking absinthe or in a cafe or something and talking about their ideas, becomes a high school student in suburban Michigan or something, killing 20 kids or something like that. And it becomes just something we live through on a daily, on a weekly basis. The thing about imagination is it's not so much a liberation. It's something we all share. It's a kind of universal quality. I mean, we all fear the same things. We all have the same desires. Everybody is afraid of death. Everybody is afraid of pain. Everybody wants sex. Everybody wants to be loved and not to be lonely. These are things that affect all humanity. You're no individual by having these emotions, and your imagination is kind of built on these biological qualities that we all share. There's nothing particularly liberating about it. I think that's what Hollywood understood. They understood that they could take Salvador Dali and turn it into a mass phenomenon. That's why Salvador Dali got interested in Hollywood to begin with. And it became massified. And the same way that the idea of shooting into a crowd of strangers became a reality. It became, it's no longer something that we have to imagine. It's something that is part of the daily news now. So I think we're living in a very decadent period in that sense. We're moving back to where things are no longer as if, but where they take on reality itself. It's It's no longer taking the mask off, it's chopping off the head completely.
Have you ever had a painting where you go, I don't want to sell this painting, I love this painting so much?
Yeah, but well, I'm always excited about paintings I just finished.
Yeah.
And in fact, I had someone here just last week who wanted one of the paintings that I had just done this year, and I said they're not. I need to have them around, but you can have anything older than that. But everything that's new becomes old. You know, you're in motion. You're.
Is it always that relationship in a way, like with your like? I know I'm the same way. You get really very excited about this.
Yeah.
And you gotta go. Okay, that was like a couple years ago.
Well, sure. That's what happens. Is it becomes older, and it becomes not only what you were doing, but you know you're developing yourself. You see, so you're not exactly the same person who made those older paintings. You're a different person. So certain things that were very exciting to you now look a little obvious, perhaps, or a little not modulated enough, not subtle enough, too much like obvious. But at the time you did it, it was very exciting, and it has legitimate. Now I'm using the word legitimacy. It has legitimacy as an expression of what you were like at that time. I think that goes for any creative person, really. You don't have to be a painter to have those feelings. But I think the opposite. If you feel more affection for what you did 10, 15, 20 years ago than what you're doing now, you're in trouble. That you feel more in touch with when you were different is not good. The whole development of an artist is predicated on keeping yourself excited about what you're doing. If you're excited about what you're doing, then whether you sell or not is less important. And if you're not excited about what you're doing, then the fact that you're selling becomes extremely important. Because if you're not selling and you're not excited, you'll stop. What's the reason for doing it if you could care less and you're not selling anyway, you see? There's always a thing about commercial work is that it has its own argument that you're making a living. Well, if you're making a living, then how you feel about it becomes a job. I mean, how do people feel about their jobs? Well, some people say, I like my job. I like the people I'm working with. I like going to the office. And then if you say to them, okay, would you do it if no one paid you? They say, what, are you fucking crazy? Of course not. I want to be paid. Otherwise, I wouldn't be caught dead there. See, so that's what a job is. I mean, it's perfectly legitimate to work for a living, but as an artist, you want to be free of those feelings. Doesn't mean you don't want to sell. Don't get me wrong about that. Everybody would like to sell. But you can't make it a question of whether you continue or not. What you're doing has to be nutritious for your soul. That's because then it has value for it has value irrespective of whether someone wants it or not. I don't really believe in owning art anyway. To be honest with you, owning art is kind of a stupid idea. I mean, why should you own it? I mean,
put it in your house and enjoy it.
Yeah, but you could do that without owning it. I mean, you could rent it. You could have it for a couple of months and then exchange it for something else. I mean, owning means you can sell it if you want to. It's property. It has a value that most people who are really collectors of art aren't really thinking about putting it on their wall. They buy things and it goes right in their storage facility. And they're holding on to it because they think it's going to increase in value and they're going to make some money. All they do have to do is hold on to it for a few years. They're not really thinking about it in any other way than you would be buying a stock.
Come on.
Is this stock going to increase in value or not? And they buy it and they think about it just like that. Because who has enough walls? If you're a collector and you've got, I don't know, 130 things, you can only put 3 or 4 of them up in your living room anyway. And if they're big paintings, you can't even do that. So basically, you're storing them. They don't do anybody any good. Paintings are supposed to be seen. I mean, the dream of an artist is, if I'm in a museum that, oh, this is interesting. So Pat Pasloff, who I've been talking about, she's now got a picture in Museum of Modern Art. They came, they took a picture. They put it up with a bunch of famous artists, women artists after the war. Joan Mitchell, Elaine de Kooning, Lee Krasner, and there's Pat right there. So I went to the opening, and there were over 1,000 people in the lobby. It was packed. And then on the sidewalk outside the Museum of Modern Art, this is like 2 in the afternoon, another, well, maybe not 1,000, but 300-400 people. I'm going up there. I go up to where her painting is, and people are just going past and looking, and I realized more people are going to see her painting today, this afternoon, than saw her paintings in her whole lifetime. More people are going to see it in one day than were able to see it all the time she was alive. You know, so that's the dream, really, is that you know, your work gets seen. That someone buys it and put it in a storage facility and it sits there in the dark in Paramus, New Jersey or something. Who gives a rat's ass about that? The only thing that's good for is a resume. Is that you can put it on your Vita or resume and you say, I have a painting in the Whitney. Well, you don't have a painting in the Whitney. You have a painting in their storage facility that will be there for all eternity. That's what that means, you see. It doesn't mean, it's nothing real except that it's like your, what do you call it? Your props, you know, this is my bona fides as a professional. That's all that means. What else?
What do you think it's important for? You were saying, like, what do you think it's important that kids have some sort of art curriculum? I mean, why is that? Why is this important? I mean, I guess the argument would say, well, they don't use it, they don't need it, they're going to be working on computers and they're going to be doing all these other things. You know, I mean, why is an art curriculum important to you?
Well, I think that physically interacting with substances, physical interaction with the world around you is part of being a human being. So working with it doesn't have to be working with color and paint. You could be working with wax, or you could even be working with an obdurate material like steel, with is an important way of connecting up with the world. What we're living through now, where everything is mediated electronically, is not fully human.
So in a way, you're sort of saying that almost abstract art is much more, in a way, culturally engaging, because, as you
Potentially.
Yes, because, primitive cultures, like, no one has to go to school to play music. They all gather around and play music together. There's not this heavy entryway into this world, whereas abstract art allows you this door to go in and practice it.
Well, it's a little bit, like if you look at Plains Indian women, Levi Strauss wrote about this. They do these quilts made out of porcupine quills. They wet the porcupine quills and they weave them. They create these patterns, these abstract patterns. There's one woman who is called the double woman. She's the connection to the spirit world. She is like a female shaman. She makes the design, the master design, and then all the women copy it. Once they have the prototype, they all make it, you see. So you're basically seeing the same design. But she's the woman who gets the design from the spirit world. Now, if you don't believe in the spirit world, you can just say she's the one who invents it. Maybe the spirit world is locked inside of her brain. It's not something in the ether. But she creates the master, and the others then do it. So you're always going to have somebody who writes the music or who invents the music, but then everybody can play it. It's a similar kind of idea. Everybody participates, but that doesn't mean that everybody's a composer. All right? But everybody has that potential. I think that certainly we see in children that they're artistic until they get frustrated and they get told that they don't have talent. You know, but there's so much more. I think I can end with this idea. There's so much more to making an artist than talent. Not that talent is meaningless. It's not. Talent is significant. But, you know, your sense of discipline, your sense that of not getting easily frustrated and not giving up. And you're sure it's good to be intelligent. But there's also, you know, your upbringing, whether you had mentors. Did you have mentors? Did you have parents who encouraged you? You know, do you come from poverty? Do you come from a broken home? All of those things you have to overcome if you're going to be an artist. They're impediments. They make life difficult. And in the end, when all is said and done, when you put that whole thing together, everything I've been talking about, talent, discipline, mentors, parents, community, friends, you put that all together, everybody's going to do exactly what they're capable of. That's why you can't be too critical. You can say about a work of art, oh, I don't like that, or a piece of music, it's not for me, I'm not interested. That's perfectly legitimate, but you can't jump on people because people are so complicated and so much goes into the mix, you know, that in the end, nobody should feel any misgivings about what anybody else is doing. We're all doing what we're capable of in the end. And so it's not an elite activity. I don't see it in any way as an elite activity. That is something that's been purveyed by people who want to keep prices very, very high. It's a capitalist idea that there's certain kinds of art that are just made for certain people, you know, and then the rest of the dummies out there, you know, who will accept anything. It's just not true. I don't believe it. That's it.